Tim Donner with LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza, author of a piece entitled "Keep Your Mouth Shut, Mr. President," in which he says that President Trump should say nothing to special counsel Robert Mueller if he is subject to a request for an interview or interrogation. Scott, why is it that the president should say nothing, should not submit to an interrogation or interview from special counsel Mueller?
Well, the reason why I think, Tim, criminal attorney would advise his client not to submit to what is, and when we say the word interview, I think that makes it sound nice and polite, when really the right word is an interrogation. And the reason why is because there's no legal benefit that can accrue to Mr. Trump or any person for submitting to such an interview. This is an interview whereby he will either incriminate himself or not. And so it's sort of like not getting hit, right? Like that's the best thing that can happen to you. It doesn't make any sense, legally speaking, to submit to this. In the piece I wrote for LibertyNation.com, I detailed what happened to Martha Stewart, who was charged with serious financial crimes, securities fraud, by James Comey. And she was not convicted of that crime. In fact, the judge found out that there was so little evidence of that federal crime that no reasonable juror could even find Ms. Stewart guilty of that serious crime. But on the crime of lying to federal officers and agents, she was in fact convicted and had to go to federal prison because there was a perjury trap. And I believe that that is what Mr. Mueller would set up for Mr. Trump, not because necessarily he has any particular animus against Mr. Trump. This is a somewhat standard prosecutorial tactic. In fact, that's why there's a name for it, a perjury trap. And that's why I asked you this advice to Mr. Trump, because it's good advice for everybody who is confronted with a request for an interrogation. Don't do it, is the prudent course.
So what you're talking about is such an interrogation inducing yet another process crime, not an actual or real crime, but a process crime in which someone says something that's refuted by somebody else or refuted by the facts. But if you were the president's attorney, would you be willing to make a compromise with the special counsel by saying, for example, that you would submit to written questions that were submitted to the president and his counsel to which they could provide written answers? Would that be a legitimate compromise?
Well, in terms of compromise, that's more of a political question. There's no legal duty that the president has or any human being has to be interviewed or interrogated by law enforcement. That there is no compulsion there that is required. Now, I think that might be a compromise, Tim, for the political legal intersection that we have here, which is to say that the president has political concerns that he has to address as well as legal concerns. And so perhaps that might be a solution whereby you take off the table the president's likelihood of making an offhand or not carefully considered remark that might get him into trouble with respect to having them in writing, that could then be vetted by these attorneys before they're submitted to the special counsel. But at the same time, that perjury trap issue is still present. And again, from the legal perspective, there's no legal benefit to Mr. Trump that can accrue from submitting such questions. So for that reason, I would advise against it.
Now, I spoke to another attorney who said if he was advising the president, as his attorneys like Ty Cobb IV are doing, he would try to make a deal with the special counsel, Robert Mueller. He'd say, I will submit to, for example, questions in writing and provide written answers, but only in return for example, a promise that the investigation would end within the next 30 or 60 days. Is that a legitimate course of action for the counsel for both the man, Donald Trump, and the President Trump to pursue?
I don't think so, Tim, because I don't think it would even be ethical or appropriate for the special counsel to bargain with that, with things outside of that. He can grant immunity if he wanted to. I don't think that's going to be done here. I doubt the president's even going to ask for it because I guess it's probably quite politically damaging for him to do so. That's what would happen in a typical case without the political element. If for some reason there might be some perceived benefit in getting that testimony down, or which often happens in these criminal cases, if a client is not the main target, then there's a potential to make a deal for somebody sort of an ancillary defendant or involved in an investigation. I don't think that's the case here. I don't think Mueller would grant such a deal. The only deal that you could make is give me immunity or not. And I think that's probably off the table for this interrogation.
Keep Your Mouth Shut, Mr. President, by LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. Check it out on LibertyNation.com. I'm Tim Donner, and this is LNTV.